Watching the clips on TV at home, Park Aram, who was next to him, mockingly said, "They called you Monster Dad." To which Jin replied, "What happened to Beastmaster?" To which Yu Meng added, "But you look great on the show." After watching the show, in which Han Yu Jin starred with his pet and finishing all his business, he and Yu Meng gathered all the resources to move to a new workplace. Hearing the great news, Yu Meng asked, "Will the maintenance department give us a workplace?" Yu Jin replied, "I asked them. You can't keep sharpening knives in the kitchen all night long." To which Yu Meng added, "You're right. We also scared your friend. I've wasted my mind." When Han Yu Jin said that Yu Meng would now have a separate room for his training, he said, "It would also be good for you to make friends with the maintenance guys. Maybe you can become colleagues in the future." Hearing this, Yu Meng happily replied, "That would be nice." Recalling his past experiences with dungeon battles, Yu Meng said sadly, "To be honest, I don't want to clear dungeons anymore." Hearing this, Jin replied, "Yeah, I don't think this kind of work is good for you." Han Yu Jin thought happily as he recalled his true unique skill. "So what? Your destiny is to be an SS-class blacksmith." Helping Yu Meng carry his belongings to the new training room, Han Yu Jin and his friend had already reached the maintenance department. Then Jin thought, "You're better off in the workshops than in the dungeons." As Han Yu Jin approached the place they needed, he opened the door and immediately stepped back, as a lot of smoke and blinding light came out of the interior, and Yu Jin said, "It's hot." And Yu Meng added in surprise, "Wow." When Han Yu Jin and his friend went inside and walked around the bridge for a while, they saw the production process and huge boilers with hot metal, and then Jin said in surprise, "This is the maintenance department." As Han Yu Jin moved further into the workshop, he looked at the production and suddenly said to Yu Meng, "Everything looks so serious. I heard that everyone here is at least E-class." Yu Meng was looking at the crystals and humming thoughtfully. Still impressed, Yu Meng walked toward the crystal he saw, and when he was about to touch it, he said, "Is this also a magic stone?" Noticing that someone was sticking their hands into the precious magic item, the head of the technical department shouted loudly to prevent damage to the material. "Hey, don't touch it!" Seeing the two strangers, the supervisor said in a gruff voice, "You're not allowed in here." Hearing this, Yu Jin spoke to him. "Ah, hello. The AIs were supposed to contact you." After saying this, Han Yu Jin added in a joyful voice, "My friend was supposed to get a job." Hearing this from the young man, the head of the technical department was surprised. "Ah." Bowing to Jin, the employee said, "Mine has indeed been contacted. I heard you have sharpening skills." Looking at the supervisor, Yu Jin thought, "The difference in physique is striking. Can Meng Wu really become a blacksmith?" Walking through the production area and leading Yu Meng to his workstation, the department head said, "Do you know how to use the sharpening machine?" He replied, "I used to use them when I was a kid." Approaching his workstation, Yu Meng saw a modern, brand-new grinding machine in front of him and exclaimed, "Wow, a special grinder." Walking over to it and examining it, Yu Jin said, "I saw it on the internet. They wrote that you just need to give it a command and it will do everything." Hearing this, the manager said, "Don't touch it, it's our equipment." Opening an abandoned warehouse, the head of the technical department said to the guy, "Your workplace is over here." When he opened the warehouse and let the boys in, they noticed that there was a lot of garbage inside, but only one old hand grinder. Pointing to the old sharpening machine, the head of the technical department said to Yu Meng, "You can use this standard machine." As he walked back out of the room, the supervisor said one last thing. "You said you know how to use it, so I'll leave." Hearing about this insolence toward his friend, Yu Jin exclaimed, "Wait!" Hearing that he was being addressed, the department head said, "Isn't this a bit much, to put someone in a dump like this?" Hearing this, Yu Meng grabbed Jin's shoulder in concern and said, "There's no need, Yu Jin." Hearing Han Yu Jin say this, all the workers nearby, including the department head, looked at him with a condemning look, wondering at his impudence. He then heard the employees whispering, "This is the guy with the connections to the guild head. F-class? We don't even let people like that in here. Fucking nepotism. We've got our hands full without him." Hearing the staff whispering like this, Yu Mengwu said to Han Yu Jin in a frustrated voice, "Of course they do. To them, I'm someone who was just pushed in here." Hearing his friend's upset voice, Han Yu Jin spoke to him. Mengwu, disappointed that he was being judged and despised by everyone here, Yu Mengwu managed to gather his thoughts and looked up and said happily to Han Yu Jin, "At least I can use the equipment now. I'll do my best." Hearing these words break through the mask of despair and smile, Han Yu Jin looked at Yu Man's eyes as he looked at his new workplace and thought, "But I feel guilty because I brought him here." As Yu Meng looked at his workroom, he picked up a chair and said enthusiastically, "So, I can sit here, right?" Placing the chair next to the machine, Yu Jin picked up a knife and prepared to work. Seeing this, Han Yu Jin spoke to him. "Are you sure you're okay? You said you hadn't used a machine like this for a long time." Hearing Han Yujin ask this question in a confused voice, Yumeng replied confidently, we should try it anyway. When they started the machine, both boys saw that it was working and said in surprise, wow, it's spinning. When Yumeng brought the knife blade to the grinding wheel, which was spinning on an axis, he saw that the machine was in good working order and was doing a good job. And he said happily, wow. Seeing the progression of Yumeng's SS-class skill even while performing such an operation, Han Yujin thought happily, this kind of sharpening counts. Checking the sharpness of the blade, Yumeng said in surprise, yes, this will do. Seeing that the progress from sharpening the blade counted even on a sharpening machine like this, Han Yujin thought, I'm sure this method of sharpening will be more reliable than the automatic machine. When he stopped thinking and looked at Yumeng, who had begun to work in earnest, Han Yujin said to him in a frightened voice, be careful. Don't hurt yourself. After saying this, Han Yujin immediately stood as if frozen in place and watched his friend's work in amazement, unable to say a word. Seeing the other man sharpening one blade after another, bringing them to perfect condition in a matter of minutes, Han Yujin was astonished to hear him say in his head, what? Looking up at his friend, who was concentrating on his work, Han Yujin was overwhelmed with emotions of surprise and embarrassment. And then he thought, can Meng be like this? Remembering his friend only on bad occasions when he was just a crybaby and a clumsy person who couldn't help himself, Han Yujin thought, the me I know, blowing out all the times he had to save Meng from all sorts of strange accidents and monster attacks. Jin said in his head, he always looked scared or depressed. Looking at his friend, who was very focused on his work, Han Yujin continued his thoughts in surprise. I have never seen him so calm before. As Yujin watched his concentrated friend work, he suddenly heard a call come in on his phone. Picking up the phone, he said, Meng Wu, I have to go. It's time to train Mir. Hearing his friend's voice, Yumeng said in surprise, oh, you've been here all this time? Jin replied, yes, while I was watching you work, the time flew by. Hearing this, Yumeng said, I'm sorry, did you spend a lot of time with me? Do you want me to walk you out? Han Yujin replied, no need. I'll see you at home. As Han Yujin turned to go back to practice with his student, he thought happily as he left the room. To be honest, I'd like to watch him again. After leaving the room where Yumeng was working, Han Yujin immediately thought of the red carp in the pond, saying, it must be something like a fish that almost suffocated in a shallow puddle. Finally returned to its native waters? As Han Yujin stepped outside, he confidently said in his head, even someone like me who is completely clueless can realize with a single glance that this is his natural talent. Closing the door before he left, Han Yujin took one last look at Yu Meng, who was completely absorbed in his work, and said in his head, I think he will be fine. Despite everything that happened on his first day at work, but the next day, Han Yujin was very depressed and completely out of it. Yu Meng had to stay home because of the incredibly severe pain in his muscles. Lying in his bed covered in bandages and compresses, Yu Meng said sadly, and this is after just one day. I'm really not fit for anything. The same morning, in the same technical department, in the locker room, when all the staff were changing into their work uniforms, someone said, didn't he come in today? After saying this question, and seeing the confusion in her colleague's eyes, she spoke again. You know, the guy who borrowed our machine. Hearing this, another worker answered her. Oh, that living example of favoritism? Hearing their conversation, a third man from the technical department spoke up. He said he couldn't come because he was sick. Hearing this, the girl mockingly said, ha! After just one day? Are you sure he's not faking it? After saying this, she added, he's probably angry because the job he was promoted to wasn't that easy. Hearing this, the third employee, who decided to go to his room, said in surprise, hey, look at this. Looking at what was happening in Yu Meng's room, the employee said, do you think that someone who would expect an easy job could do this? Hearing this, the girl asked in surprise, huh? What are you talking about? After opening the door fully and showing the new employee the work he was doing, the third employee of the technical department said, 1,000. Looking around his workplace and showing the others the enormous amount of work he had done in just one day, he said, this guy sharpened 1,000 knives in one day. After these events, when the incident with the visit to the workroom dispelled all doubts and premature conclusions about Yu Meng, a whole week had already passed. And on that very day, Yu Meng had already achieved considerable results in such a short period of time. His concentration on work could be the envy of many other employees. Sitting in front of the sharpening machine, Yu Meng did his job perfectly, and his progress in sharpening knives was already 5,600 sharpened blades out of 10,000. And that evening, after returning home from work, Yu Meng Wu set a wonderful dinner table with many delicious dishes. Seeing this, Park Aram, who was amazed, said in awe, ah, what is this? Sitting down at the table, Han Yujin, equally surprised, said, the whole table is shining. Does sharpening the blades also raise the level of cooking? And Park Aram added, oh gods, what is all this? After tasting a small portion, Park Aram couldn't help but cry at the delicious taste of the food and said, "Mang Wu Appa, let's live together forever." Hearing this, Han Yujin said in surprise, "Wow, she called him Appa! Such a change after just one spoonful of rice." Quickly eating everything Yuman had prepared, Park Aram quickly said, "I need to eat a lot. I won't be able to get such delicious food in the dungeon." Hearing this, Yujin said, "Oh, that's right. You're going to the dungeon today, aren't you?" Chewing on her food, Park Aram said to Han Yujin with a mouthful of food, "Yeah. To be honest, it's been so boring lately." Thinking back to her last dungeon trips where she was taken along, Park Aram said in frustration, "I'm only allowed to go to Class B dungeons and lower because I'm underage. But I need to level up faster to gain new skills and become rich." As she continued to savor her food, Park Aram said thoughtfully, "I wonder if it would be better if I went to the dungeon every day without a break. If I use all my skills at the same time, I could even go to several dungeons a day." Hearing this, Han Yujin spoke to her. "You can't do that." After telling her that she should not do so, Han Yujin explained to her the danger of such actions, saying, "It's easy to drain when you're low on health, but it's hard to notice when you're running out of mana. Imagine what would happen if you fainted in the middle of a dungeon due to lack of mana," Han Yujin added after saying this, asking her a question. "Even with potions. Oh, by the way, Aram, how much mana do you have?" Hearing this, Park Aram replied, 102. Hearing this from the girl, Han Yujin realized that their levels were completely different, and he immediately fell silent because his mana was only 2, and the equipment itself added another 29. Hearing this, Han Yujin thought in frustration, who else should worry about whom? Her stats are 51 times my own. Even if I add up all my stats, her mana stats will be 5 times higher. After answering Jin, Park Aram spoke enthusiastically to Yumang. "By the way, Meng Wu Appa, aren't you going to go to the dungeon again?" To which he replied, No. Hearing Meng Yumang's answer, Park Aram said to him, "You can become rich if you go there as a cook. No, we can just open a restaurant here." Hearing this suggestion, Yumang said in confusion, I don't know." Hearing Yumang's response, Park Aram stood up from the table and spoke to him. "With your talents, you don't have to be a hunter." Han Yujin walked over to Yumyan and asked him, "Aren't you overexerting yourself lately? You've been sharpening your blades all day, and then you've been cooking." Hearing this, Yumang said to him, "Not at all. It's just that I enjoy it." Han Yujin held out his gloves to Yumang and said to him, At least use these. I'll lend them to you." When he saw Zhang handing him his gloves, he was surprised. "Oh?" Taking Han Yujin's gift, Yumang said in surprise, "Your gloves, aren't they very expensive? You said they were A grade." To which Yujin replied, "I haven't been using them much lately anyway because of the hot weather." After saying this, Han Yujin said, "You can use them at least until you finish sharpening the blades." Hearing this from his friend, Yumeng beamed with happiness. Throwing himself into Yujin's arms and shedding tears of joy, Yumeng said to him, "Yu Ji Ying, I promise that this favor will not be in vain. I will never take them off." Jin said to him in embarrassment, Leave me alone. At least take them off in the restroom." After Han Yujin lent his gloves to Yuman, he came closer and closer to achieving his goal step by step. And so, the next day, when he moved the boxes of old knives, he breathed a sigh of relief. Having moved enough knives to cover his workload for the afternoon, Yumeng said, "This will be enough to sharpen them after the lunch break." Wiping the sweat from his tired face, Yumeng said wearily, "It's hot. It should be after all, there's a lot of fire being used here." As he wiped himself with the sleeve of his uniform, Yumeng heard someone's voice behind him say, "Use it." Turning back, he noticed that a towel was being held out to him. As he took it, one of the maintenance workers who was passing by said as she handed him the towel, "This towel is made of magical materials, which is why it retains its temperature." After saying this and going on with her work, the girl finally said, "It's quite hot in here." Looking at her in surprise, Yumeng said, "Thank you." After that, Yumeng finished his lunch break and went to his workplace. After finishing all the work, he stretched and breathed out a sigh of relief and said, I'm exhausted." Pulling out his phone to check the time, Yumeng said in surprise, "Oh, is it really that late?" As Yumeng walked back through the workshops, he looked around and said in surprise, "Wow, has everyone gone home already?" As Yumeng passed by one of the rooms, he noticed again the magic crystal that he had seen on the first day he had come to the technical department. Unable to restrain his curiosity, Yumeng Wu walked closer to it, and after looking at it closely, he said in surprise, "It glows by itself? Amazing." As he examined it more closely, Yumeng heard a loud shout from behind him, "Don't touch it as you please!" Startled by the surprise, Yumeng only hiccuped in response. When he heard someone behind him shouting at him not to touch the crystal, Yumeng turned around in alarm, and when he saw the head of the technical department behind him, he said, "I didn't touch. The The man walked closer to the boy and spoke to him. This is an S-class magic crystal, worth about 1 billion. Hearing this, Yumeng said in surprise, Wow, really? Looking at the precious crystal, the head of the technical department spoke to Yumeng. It is very rare for a crystal of this size to be completely preserved. We've set it aside because we're not even sure how to process it yet. As he bent down to wipe the crystal, the technical department head said sadly, It's a pity. Even a team of such a large guild with all its equipment doesn't have a person in their ranks who can work with it. After saying this, the department head added angrily, And even more so, the F-class can't even dream of such a thing. After saying this, the head of the technical department spoke to Yumeng. I'm sure it's not easy for you to be accused of being a bloke. To which Yumeng objected, What? No, Hearing Yumeng's uncertain answer, the head of the technical department spoke to him. We are all meritocrats here. That's why we don't recognize those who come here without being properly selected. Hearing this, Yumeng rubbed his neck and said, I see. But suddenly, after announcing the selection, the head of the technical department looked at Yumeng and said happily, But sometimes there are people in life. Having said that, he continued, who need a special chance to get out of the mud they've been in all their lives. Hearing this, Yumeng turned his head to the head of the technical department, who looked at him in surprise, and the latter continued, You even sharpened our workers' tools yesterday, right? Without turning his head toward Yumeng, the head of the technical department said with a serious expression, showing no emotion. I took a look at them. They looked as if they were new. Looking at the huge crystal in front of them, the man said, I think that you have a tendency to do this. So, in the future, show me that you are not just some kind of thug. After saying this, the head of the technical department, seeing Yumeng heave a sigh of relief, added, Well, if you're interested in working with us, the lack of stats can be compensated for with strength-enhancing equipment. Hearing this from the head of the technical department, Yumeng immediately beamed with happiness and said happily, I'll do my best. And indeed, everything was going just fine. But it didn't last very long. Happy everyday life continued until one certain moment. In the middle of a working day, the door to the workshop opened, and several people in black suits came in and asked, Is Hunter Meng Wu here? After saying this, and looking anxiously at who would respond, the girl who had been looking for him immediately spoke up, heading toward Yumeng. You are Meng Wu, right? After saying this, the girl added, Please come with us. Hearing this, the employees who were in the same room with Meng spoke to the guests. What's the matter? She walked over to Yumeng and put her hand on his shoulder and said in anxiety, Hunter Han Yu-jin. She looked at Yumeng, who was seriously frightened, and added, He has disappeared. We're investigating right now. Hearing this bad news, Yumeng, who had just started enjoying his normal life, was thrown off his stride by the news and said in a frightened voice, What? Thinking about what the agent girl had just told him, Yumeng exclaimed in alarm, He couldn't have disappeared! Yu-jin said he was planning to stay in the abyss all day today. After saying this, Yumeng added, And I didn't see him come into contact with anyone suspicious either. Extending her hand to Meng, the agent girl said, So, he couldn't have disappeared by himself? Hearing what was happening, an alarmed Aram came to Yumeng and asked, What's wrong with Uncle? When Yumeng saw Park Aram in front of him, he was surprised. Aram? Didn't you go to the dungeon today? She replied, I was summoned while I was on my way there. I came back immediately. When the agent's partner saw that Aram had arrived, he led Park behind him and said, Please follow me. The chairman has also returned. Then the girl asked, Is there any news? Following them, the girl agent radioed in. Yes, the inspection has turned up nothing. Hearing that the chairman had returned, Yumeng exclaimed, Oh wait, I'm here too, if there's anything I can do to help. Hearing this, the agent's partner replied to him, Please stay here, it will be safer. Having said that, the agent's girlfriend's partner added one last thing as he left the room. I am very sorry, but there is nothing you can do. A few hours before Han Yu-jin disappeared, everything was as usual. It was a sunny day and the weather was beautiful. As Han Yu-jin lay on the couch, enjoying his beautiful life, he said happily, It's so peaceful. Spending a wonderful day at home with no one else around, Han Yu-jin said, Both Yu Haiyan and Aram are doing well. I've recruited Miss Ha-young, and it's only a matter of time before Yuman's skills are awakened. As Han Yu-jin lay on the couch, enjoying his life, he said happily, Now I have nothing to worry about at all. Except for the couch, of course, which is currently being destroyed by Peace. After destroying half the room, tearing up many toys and books, and breaking several pots of plants, Mir grabbed Jin by the hair and started dragging him out for a walk. He said, Good, you're tired of sitting at home, right? Standing up from the couch, Han Yu-jin looked at his pet, who was making the whole room look sad, and said, Shall we go downstairs and practice? Opening the door from his room and seeing the guard standing outside, Han Yu-jin spoke to him. Hello, I'm going to go out for a while. Holding his pet in his arms, Han Yu-jin heard a question addressed to him. Where are you going? Hearing this question, Jin thought, this is a bit annoying. After negotiations, the major guilds decided to take turns sending bodyguards to Han Yu-jin. Probably these tricks are necessary to keep an eye on me and keep each other in check. And today it's B-class from the ISS. After informing his superiors that Yu-jin wanted to go downstairs, and after receiving permission, he said, Yes, we're going down right now. You're going to the training room, right? Hearing this question, Han Yu-jin answered him while Mir reached for the elevator buttons. Sitting in the boy's arms, Mir managed to reach the right button and pressed it to get to the second floor. Seeing what his pet had just done, Han Yu-jin let go of him and said happily, Peace, my baby. He pushed the right elevator button by himself. After saying this, and picking him up to cuddle him, Han Yu-jin said to the bodyguard, Isn't our little one a good boy? After saying this and seeing no reaction, Han Yu-jin said in embarrassment, Ahem. But what was he thinking? Yesterday's bodyguard was so excited about Mir. Continuing to think about his student skills, Han Yu-jin decided, well, he doesn't have to be liked by everyone. Stopping on the way down, the elevator doors opened and 3 people entered, saying, Excuse me! Once inside the elevator, one of the men said, Excuse me, we have quite large suitcases. Hearing this, Han Yu-jin said to them, Oh, that's okay. Looking at their characteristics, Han Yu-jin was surprised by their grades and thought, Judging by their grades, aren't they from the abyss? Seeing their ranks, Han Yu-ching suddenly asked the unexpected guests, Are you from another guild? One of them replied, Oh, we are from Bricks, the abyssal sub-guild. After saying this, the man added, looking at his suitcases, A bunch of armor and other large items are being pulled out of the low-level dungeons as byproducts. Looking at Han Yu-jin, one of the men spoke to him, All the suitcases have already been checked. We are not suspicious people. Hearing this, Han Yu-jin replied, Haha, you guys are definitely working hard. Arriving at the right floor, all the passengers got off the elevator. Finally, before they left, one of the porters said, Well, we'll be going. Good luck. Jin replied, Yes, goodbye. As they walked toward the training room where they were originally headed, Han Yu-jin, holding his pet, said in surprise, Suspicious. Looking back, Han Yu-jin was disappointed in the movers and thought, Why didn't they say anything about Mir being cute? When Han Yu-jin arrived at the training room, he thought, No, why me? After all, things happen in life. It's not necessary for everyone you meet to praise Mir. When Han Yu-jin arrived at the training place, he let his pet go onto the training ground and said to him, Here we are. Grabbing the rope first, Jin's student turned to him, expressing his desire to play. Seeing this, Yu-jin said to him, God, it's fine. Do you want to play tug-of-war first? After saying this, and seeing that his student wanted to play, Han Yu-jin put on his gloves and said happily, Wait a moment, your daddy will get ready. As Han Yu-jin was putting on his gloves and looking behind him to get his protective suit, he saw 2 people behind him. The next moment, Han Yu-jin saw some red powder being thrown on him and said in surprise, Whoa, what? This powder! Seeing what had just happened to his master, Mir looked at Jin in fright. But Jin had 2 notifications. Sentinel fruit detected. Poison resistance activated. Neutralizing items effect. When it hit Han Yu-jin's pet, the sentinel fruit powder immediately affected it, even though the animal tried to dispel it in front of it. Seeing that his animal had lost consciousness, Han Yu-jin, who had not been affected by the poison, cried out in fright, Peace! Grabbing Han Yu-jin and trying to tie him up with a towel over his mouth to prevent him from making noise. One of the kidnappers said, This powder should have put him to sleep instantly. Why is he still conscious? Holding out his hand to Han Yu-jin, one of the kidnappers said, Did the abyss equip him with an antidote item? Looking at the kidnappers, Yu-jin said, Those guys from Bricks. Unable to understand what exactly they were doing here, Han Yu-jin struggled and groaned, trying to understand, What are they even doing here? Kicking one of them, who was standing right in front of him, and throwing him away, Han Yu-jin thought in surprise, How did they even get in here? Having neutralized one of the attackers, Han Yu-jin was immediately able to break free from the other. When one of the attackers saw what was happening, he exclaimed, What the hell? Doesn't he have an F-class stature? Having escaped from the clutches of the attackers, Han Yu-jin headed for the entrance to get help, thinking, I just need to get to the door to see the guard. He opened the door and shouted, Help! Someone looks suspicious! Before he could say anything, his bodyguard punched him in the body, thus incapacitating Han Yu-jin. Having dealt Han Yu-jin a serious blow, the bodyguard spoke to the 3 kidnappers who were unable to deal with him on their own. Can't you do it right? Looking at Han Yu-jin lying on the ground, the guard said sternly, His equipment. Brother definitely gave him high-level items. Take them off him. Hearing this order from the guard, the 3 kidnappers grabbed Han Yu-jin and began to remove everything that looked like equipment. Noticing this, Yu-jin thought, What the hell? As he tried to break free, he heard, Don't move! And then he saw the system notifications. The leather reinforcement gloves had been removed. Strength reduced by 25. Current value, 4. Lightweight fabric belt has been removed. Dexterity reduced by 16. As Han Yu-jin watched his equipment being removed, he thought, MK betrayed us? Those bastards sent a spy instead of a bodyguard? Pull yourself together. We have to get out somehow. As Han Yu-jin came closer, one of the attackers, noticing that he was also wearing earrings, said thoughtfully, Could the antidote be in the earrings? As he said this, one of the attackers immediately reached out to take them out of Han Yu-jin's ears. He noticed this and thought sharply, Stop! No! The Dark Elf's earring has been removed. Mana reduced by 29. Just as he removed the earring, Yu-jin thought, How many skills did I use before? If they take off the earring, my mana... As he said this, he remembered what Park Aram had said. It's easy to tell when your health is critically low, but it's hard to tell when your mana is running out. Imagine what would happen if you lost your memory in the middle of a dungeon due to lack of mana. When Wit lost his Dark Elf earring, he felt weak all over his body and thought tiredly, I don't even have a single point of mana. Seeing that Yu-jin had passed out, one of the kidnappers spoke with relief. He's finally fallen asleep. Hearing this, another added, Put him and the monster in the suitcase. They were already checked when we came in, so they won't be searched on the way out. Hearing this before he completely lost consciousness, Han Yu-jin thought in confusion. Damn, realizing that the situation couldn't have been worse, because everything had been planned to the last detail. Yu-jin thought sadly, I should have realized this right away, when they didn't appreciate peace. After losing consciousness, time flew by very quickly for Yu-jin. But suddenly he regained consciousness. Feeling a strange coldness on his body, Jin immediately realized that his dream had been cut short. To bring him back to life, he was doused with cold water from a bucket. When he came to, Yu-jin began to cough and then said irritably, What the hell? Feeling a strange constraint in his body, the boy with the water dripping from his head looked at his hands, which were tied with a rope, and then heard someone's hoarse voice. You've finally woken up. Han Yu-jin looked up in the direction of the voice and saw a stout man who was completely unfamiliar to him. Seeing that he had regained consciousness and finally realized what had happened, Kim Ju spoke to him. You were snoring so loudly, so I decided to help you wash your face. Han Yu-jin, who was dripping with water, looked at his captor with an appraising gaze and thought, Kim Woo-jae? I don't remember that name. Recalling the names of the men who had kidnapped him, Han Yu-jin said in his head, Is he from the same guild as the kidnappers? If he's a B grade, he must be either the head or the deputy head. Approaching Han Yu-jin, the leader of the kidnapping gang spoke to him in a threatening tone. I don't feel comfortable bullying a weak F-class, so let's get this straight. Grabbing Han Yu-jin by the hair, Kim Ju spoke to him in a menacing tone. That fiery horned lion you're training. You have the master's mark, right? Give it to me. When Kim Ju told the boy to give him the mark of the master, he saw the anger on Jin's face, so he stood up and lit a cigar, and the criminal said, You better not expect anyone to come after you. Explaining the gravity of the situation to the disgruntled and arrogant boy, Kim Ju added, It will be much better for you to just give the sign voluntarily. Hearing that he was demanding a sign from Han Yu-jin, the boy thought about it. If he wants the sign, it means that Mir wasn't killed. But according to what he said, they must have brought him here somewhere. Deciding to intimidate the criminal, Han Yu-jin arrogantly exclaimed, Do you really think you can get away with this? If I'm hurt, the 5 guilds in the association will stand up for me. Hearing such selfless words from the boy, Kim Ju spoke to him, showing him the screen of his phone. Well, it's only a matter of time. You see, these messages are sent by your bodyguard. Thinking of Han Yu-jin, the bodyguard who was assigned to him that day, and who had been cooperating with them, Kim Ju said, He is still guarding the training room. No one even knows you've been kidnapped. The kidnapper added in a happy voice, looking at his unfortunate hostage. And even if they do know, how many centuries will it take for them to find this place? As Kim Ju spoke about his location, he said to Han Yu-jin in a smug voice, There are millions of containers like this one in this port. While they were talking to each other, a forklift had already begun its work of loading containers onto a ship, and Kim Ju's voice came out of one of them. By the time they try in vain to find us, we will have reached Japan. Hearing what Kim Ju had just said, Han Yu-jin shouted out in alarm, Japan? Did the Japanese arrange all this? To which he calmly replied, No, it's just an auction being held there. Having said that, Kim Ju added no less important information about the kidnapping. We've been promised generous sponsorship for you, and half of the amount that people will pay for you at the auction. Hearing this, Jin thought in confusion. I see. Reflecting on what had happened to him, Jin realized. If they can't do anything to me in Korea, they decided to sell me to another country. That's why the sub-guild and the bodyguard agreed to cooperate. As he thought about this, Ji wondered about another thing. Will they be able to rescue us in time? Once it becomes clear that I've been kidnapped, the guilds and the association will stop everything to search for me, even if they have to use the Coast Guard. After thinking it over, Han Yu-jin made a plan of action and decided, but things will get complicated once the ship leaves territorial waters, so I need to stall for time until then at all costs. After telling Han Yu-jin all about their plans and further actions, Kim Ju said to the boy, so why don't you give up and give the sign? As Kim Ju said this, he heard the boy laughing out loud. Surprised by the hostage's strange behavior, he asked in astonishment, what? What's so funny? Jin answered him, I take it you've been shot in the head? Do you really think I'm going to wet myself with fear and just give it to you after you told me everything? Hearing Han Yu-jin say that, Kim Ju was surprised. What? He replied, what? You have just admitted that I am a very valuable commodity. You cannot harm me, so why should I be afraid of you? Taking a drag on his cigarette, Kim Ju said in surprise, so you're really smart. Hearing this, Han Yu-jin answered him, smart? You guys are idiots for not thinking this through. What a shame. Your face and brains both suck. As he continued to mock Kim Ju, Han Yu-jin watched him put out his cigarette and stood up. Even if I give you a sign, no matter how you use it, you dumbass. Before he could finish his sentence, Han Yu-jin suddenly felt pain in his torso from a knee strike from the thug who could not stand such insulting words. Watching Han Yu-jin lying on the ground, writhing in pain, Kim Ju shouted angrily, have you grown balls? You obviously don't understand the situation you're in if you're talking like that. Lying on the ground, writhing in pain, Han Yu-jin turned his head toward the thug and spoke in a scathing tone. I don't realize? Haha, of course I do. Watching his opponent boil over before his eyes, Han Yu-jin continued to tease and provoke him, saying, I have brains, unlike the dunce in front of me, and my skills are much better. Hearing such insulting words against him, Kim Ju could barely restrain himself from killing the boy, and he heard him say, B-class guys like you are nothing. Even if you assemble a truckload of dumbasses like you, you're no match for me. After hearing Han Yu-jin's insults, Kim Ju stepped on him and said angrily, that's right. Your body is very valuable, so it cannot be broken. What a pity I can't do more to you. Grabbing Jin by the collar, Kim Ju lifted him up, and then Jin thought, go on, go further, cut me up, rip my intestines open. I need you to make me half dead, so you have to spend time looking for a hospital or something. Holding Han Yu-jin by the collar, Kim Ju pulled him into another container, saying, but I'd better introduce you to your new friend. Hearing this, Yu-jin exclaimed in surprise, ha! Dragging him into another container, Kim Ju threw the boy straight into the cage of his monster pet, which they had also raised specifically for such occasions. Throwing Jin into the iron bars of the cage that separated the monster from freedom, Kim Ju loomed over him and spoke ominously, we also have a demonic beast that we are raising. Hearing this, Jin said in confusion, what? Realizing what had just happened and where he was, Han Yu-jin cried out in fright. Seeing the boy's frightened expression, Kim Ju said to him with a mocking tone, now you're scared. Watching the monster grab the boy with its slimy tentacles from the cage, Kim Ju added, a C-grade crack monster. It casts a curse of poisoning on the victim with its tentacles. Looking at his monster, Kim Ju said happily, it causes unbearably savage pain. Just 30 minutes is enough to make anyone scream and foam at the mouth. Leaving the container and closing the door behind him, Kim Ju said to Han Yu-jin in closing, let's see how a valuable commodity like this will beg for mercy. As he closed the door, Kim Ju watched Han Yu-jin's terrified look as he was completely engulfed by the monster's tentacles and said one last thing before leaving. I'll give you half an hour. Have fun. Meanwhile, incredibly strange things were happening in the Abyssal Guild. Park Aram, as soon as she learned about Han Yu-jin's disappearance and met the agents, went with them to the headquarters. Opening the door, she saw Han Yu-hyun drying his hands with a towel, and when he saw the girl, he said, there you are, Huntress Park Aram. Turning her head away from the girl and continuing to dry her hands, she walked confidently toward him, looking down at him. And at that time, Han Yu-hyun added, I just received a call from the head of the ISS Guild. As she approached the Abyssal Guild's head, the girl, barely containing her aggression, grabbed Han Yu-heng by the collar and bent him over. Explain. Standing behind, watching, the agent reached out in embarrassment to calm the girl down, seeing what she was doing. And then Aram spoke up in anger. You said it was safe in the abyss. You said that my uncle would be safe here. And now what? Listening to all the accusations from the girl, who was very concerned about Han Yu-jin, Han Yu-hyun answered her. It shouldn't have happened. To which she replied, then how did it happen? As Han Yu-hyun reflected on how this could have happened, he said, the chance of a treacherous act by the direct subjects of an S-class hunter is very slim, especially if they had to clear the dungeon together. After saying this, Han Yu-heng added, just like wild animals that follow their alpha to survive. The hunters are irresistibly obeyed by the S-class at the level of their instincts. Having said that, Han Yu-hyun concluded, That's why only bodyguards who were directly subordinate to the guild leaders were allowed to guard my brother. Hearing this, Park Aram exclaimed in anger, "Then why was my uncle kidnapped?" After explaining the whole situation and the selection of Han Yu-jin's bodyguards, Han Yu-hyun spoke, mentioning today's bodyguard. It turned out that the bodyguard who was supposed to come was not the one who came after all. Han Yu-hyun added, "The ISS is sponsored by the powerful unawakened. Unlike the Abyss, which is centered on hunters, the ISS's internal power structure is divided." Thinking of the ISS guild leader, Han Yu-hyun said thoughtfully, "And so, one of the guild's sponsors found out about my brother and arbitrarily organized his kidnapping." After saying this, Yu-hyun added, "This also means that Choi Seok-won has lost control of the guild, having been cornered by the sponsors. I expected the day to come when the two powers would clash, but I never imagined that they would cooperate with one of our sub-guilds. I also didn't think that they would use low-level hunters who were not subordinate. I'm an F-class brother, so I really should have been wary of such hunters." After listening to Han Yu-hyun's speech, Park Aram shouted at him in irritation, "So what did the head of the ISS tell you? Where is Uncle now?" To which Yu-hyun said with a heavy sigh, "That still needs to be found out." Touching his hand to Park Aram's hand that had grabbed him, Han Yu-jin looked at her guiltily and said, "That's why I summoned you, Huntress Park Aram." After saying this, Han Yu-hyun spoke to Park Aram, trying to get her to use her skill. "Please, could you use body whiteness?" Looking at Han Yu-hyun with a stern look, Park Aram, realizing what had happened here, said, "Ah, now I understand why this place smells so much like blood." She led the girl to the room and asked, "This is the room, right? I need to read the memories from the bodyguard's corpse?" Han Yu-hyun replied, "That's right. Find a place where they can hold your brother." Looking inside the room, Han Yu-hyun looked at the dead body of the bodyguard and spoke to Park Aram, who had her hand over her nose. "I've already warned you that the Abyssal Guard will take care of the bodyguard." Looking at the bloody body of the bodyguard who was responsible for Han Yu-jin's integrity and safety, Han Yu-hyun said, "I guess it's safer than trying to force a confession out of him." Standing in front of the entrance to the room where the corpse was, Han Yu-hyun spoke to the girl who was entering. "This must remain a secret from my brother." She replied, "Yes, not a word to him." Meanwhile, somewhere on the coast at the seaport, Kim Ju picked up his phone and saw that there was no message from his bodyguard accomplice. Surprised by this, he said, "That's strange." Looking at his phone and checking when the last message from him was sent, Kim Ju said, "Why doesn't that bastard report to me anymore?" After finishing his cigarette and looking away from the phone screen, Kim Ju said thoughtfully, "We couldn't have already been exposed after such a short period of time, could we?" Kim Ju threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stomped on it with his shoe. "Well, I don't care. If I get the sign, I'll be in the black even if the rest of the mission fails." After these words, Kim Ju noticed that time was running out and went to the container where Han Yu-jin was staying. Opening the door, he said happily, "How are you two doing? Did you have a good time together?" As the sunlight entered, Kim Ju saw Han Yu-jin's body lying unconscious on the floor. Startled by this, Kim Ju exclaimed in astonishment, "Huh? What the—" As Kim Ju approached the man, he touched him with his foot and began to move it, saying, "This curse doesn't even allow you to lose consciousness while it's still active. Hey, get up." Stepping on the boy, Kim Ju said smugly, mocking the boy, "Ha ha! Don't you have the strength to even move? What are you mumbling about?" As soon as the kidnapper got close enough to let his guard down, Han Yu-jin called out, "Now ink!" After these words, the monster ran out of the cage and headed for the man. Moving along the ceiling so that it could not be seen, the monster crept up on the man and was about to attack, and the captor in turn spoke arrogantly to Yu-jin, mocking him. "Huh? What?" Angry at the guy for pretending and mocking him, Kim Ju shouted at him in a rough voice, "What are you talking about?" Before he could finish speaking, the kidnapper noticed some tentacles near him, and sensing danger, he jumped away. And immediately afterwards, a monster fell on the spot. Not understanding what was happening and seeing that the monster had grabbed his arm with its tentacle, Kim Ju exclaimed in fright, "What? What the hell?" Kim Ju looked over at Han Yu-jin, who was sitting across from him and petting the C-class monster he was raising, and exclaimed, "This is impossible. How is this possible?" Seeing that Han Yu-jin had tamed even such a giant, the kidnapper screamed in fright, trying to escape the monster's tentacles. "I was told that you can only tame cubs." Hearing this exclamation from Kim Ju, Han Yu-jin spoke to him with a sly expression on his face. "You should know better than to reveal all the details of your skill." Hearing Han Yu-jin speak to him, the kidnapper yelped in fright, pulling the monster's tentacle. "Shit! I wasn't told about this at all." Wincing at the pain that was gradually spreading through his body as the monster had already put its curse on him, Kim Ju said in frustration, "No one said you could do that." Looking at his enemy, who was already in the position of prey with a gleeful look, Yu-jin said happily, "I didn't expect an ordinary F-class to be able to do this, did you?" As he said this, Han Yujin suddenly remembered what had happened in the first seconds of being locked in with this monster half an hour ago and left alone. Looking at the monster he was about to deal with, Han Yujin was initially very frightened, but then he made a worried face and spoke in his head. What an abomination. What are those tentacles? As he watched the monster walk toward him with its teeth bared, Yujin thought, the skill of resisting curses is certainly good, but will I be able to resist it in a direct attack? Trying to summon some kind of weapon, Han Yujin formed a dagger in his hand and said with relief, thank goodness I can use the inventory. But despite this joy that he had some ability, Han Yujin was still anxious, and he thought as he looked at the enemy, and yet, will I be able to withstand 30 minutes against a C-class? As Han Yujin stood there, preparing to attack the monster, he suddenly noticed that the monster was not attacking him, but was even backing away in fright, looking back and forth. Upon noticing this, he thought in surprise, Retreating? Noticing that the enemy had lost his desire to fight him, Han Yujin slowly walked toward him, thinking, what has come over him? He must be frightened by something. As he approached the monster, he added, I'm an F-class. No sooner had he said this than he saw a system alert that read, Dragon Slayer and Rahitas Predator activated. Upon seeing this message, it was immediately followed by another that told the boy, doubling all effects in front of crack. Noticing that his skills had been activated, Han Yujin said in surprise, is this because of my Dragon Slayer title? Dragon Slayer, L. Confirmation of killing a first-class dragon alone. Rahitas Predator, S. Doubles all skill effects when fighting Rahitas and other dragons of the same species. Seeing these notifications, Han Yujin thought, since I received this title for killing the poison and cursed Dragon King, it affects dragons of the same species. Looking at this monster, Han Yujin said thoughtfully, although I don't have any attacking skills. Reaching out to the monster, Han Yujin suddenly realized something and added, but if the effects are doubled, then the effect of nurturing is doubled, right? Thinking about this development of events in the face of new information, Han Yujin decided to change his approach dramatically. The next moment, he threw the dagger out of his hand. Throwing the dagger on the ground, the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small jar and spoke to the monster. Well, Chernish, good boy. After showing the monster what he had taken out of his inventory, Han Yujin said defiantly, do you want a treat? It's a finely crushed C-grade magic crystal. After mentioning all of this, Han Yujin spoke to Kim Ju. Well, I cannot tell you the details, but I have to say that I was either lucky or just had a good match. Looking at his enemy, who was scared to death and cuddling with his new monster, Han Yujin said, thanks to you, I have truly been able to make a very good friend. And then Han Yujin immediately called out to his new pet, Fetch, Ink! Hearing this command from his master, the monster attacked Kim Ju. When Kim Ju saw that the monster had attacked him, he easily tore off the tentacles and exclaimed in anger, Attack with tentacles! After breaking the monster's tentacles and escaping from its grasp, Kim Ju looked at his arm, which was wounded by the poison, and said in frustration, Ugh, you bastard, how dare you? After saying that, Kim Ju felt something stabbing him in the back, and looking back, he said to Han Yujin, what the hell are you doing? By waving his hand away from the boy who had stabbed him in the back and throwing him a considerable distance away, Kim Ju was finally able to repel all the attacks of the monster and the boy while standing on his feet. Looking at his captor, Kim Yujin breathed heavily and said, Ha ha, even a knife is no match for a B-class weakened by poison. Hearing this, and feeling unbearable pain in the right side of his back and in his arm, which had been injured by the monster, Kim Ju grabbed his arm and shouted out in anger, B**********. As he said this, the exhausted enemy, watching the monster rush toward him, heard the boy who accompanied him say, Let's do it again, Ink. Pulling out a weapon from his inventory, the weakened enemy shouted angrily, I don't care! This is a C-class monster! Pulling out his crescent-shaped weapon, the exhausted B-class hunter exclaimed angrily, I can kill him with one hand! As soon as he said this, the next moment the monster was lying motionless on the ground with its head severed, and the kidnapper was standing tiredly on both legs, looking down. Looking back at the monster, Kim Ju saw Han Yujin running up to him, and Kim mockingly said, Ha, ha, ha. Did you really think you could do anything with that thing? Looking at the way Han Yujin leaned over the dead monster and put his hand on it, Kim Ju added, No matter what trick you use, you low-class beetle, it's nothing against a B-class. After saying this, Kim Ju turned to him and added mockingly, You'll pay for what you did. To me. As soon as he said this, he suddenly felt something happening to him and said in fright, What? Before he could say this to Han Yujin, he fell to the ground in a flash from the suddenly overwhelming feeling of ill health. Seeing this, Han Yujin slowly got up and watched Kim Ju clutch his chest in pain and break out in a cold sweat. Looking at the dead monster, Kim Ju said in confusion, What the shit? I thought I had killed it. Looking at the dead monster lying on the ground, Kim Ju, feeling an overwhelming pain spreading throughout his body, said, "His curse is a class below me." As Han Yujin got to his feet and loomed over Kim Ju in an irresistible silhouette, he received a new system notification that alerted him, activating the skill, Final Retribution. Looking at his opponent, who could not help but writhe in pain and looked at the boy with a confused look, he received another system notification. The skills and abilities of the Monster Inc. are transferred with double the power. Han Yujin looked at his now worthless and incapable enemy with his golden eyes, and then a new system notification came, Rauchita's Predator skill activation, doubling all effects of the skill Final Retribution. Standing over his enemy, Han Yujin spoke to him in a respectful tone. "Since the skill has doubled, you're going to be in a lot of pain." Looking at his enemy, who was gritting his teeth and staring at Han Yujin with eyes full of hatred, Kim Ju heard, "I'm just doing to you exactly what you did to me, so it's self-defense, right?" Hovering over his enemy, Han Yujin looked down on him and spoke to the insignificant kidnapper. "And you had to touch someone who just wanted a peaceful life?" Grabbing Kim Ju by the hair and raising his head to his own level, looking into his frightened eyes, Han Yujin said, "Now, let me ask the questions this time. Where are you keeping my little mirror?" Hearing this question from Han Yujin, Kim Ju gritted his teeth in pain and said in fright, You son of a bitch." Drooling and foaming at the mouth from the unbearable pain, Kim Ju spoke to him in a hateful voice. "What the hell are you damn monster?" While writhing in excruciating pain, Kim Ju said to Han Yujin, "I will find out and kill you. I'll kill you for sure." Hearing this, Han Yujin spoke to him in an indifferent tone. "I see. You won't tell me the whole story." After saying this, Han Yujin, looking at his enemy, who was already on the verge of death, writhing in pain, added, "In this case, there is no point in my keeping you alive, don't you think?" Realizing that his enemy was not going to tell him anything useful at all, Han Yujin decided to waste no time and used his newly acquired skill from the monster to cast the viscous poison. Looking at his enemy, who was slowly dissolving in the venom that Jin had poured on him, he finally said, "I'm sorry, but my skills, especially the last retribution, cannot be revealed." After covering the kidnapper with this viscous poison, Han Yujin noticed that he was no longer showing any signs of life, and finally said, "And why did you need to kidnap me?" After finishing off his enemy and heading for the exit, Han Yujin said in disappointment, "I had hoped that at least in this life I would not have to kill anyone." As Han Yujin left the room, he said in an indifferent tone, "I would prefer to leave your body without doing anything to it." As he said this, he added, covering the rest of the body with a poison that would destroy it to the ground for evidence disposal. "But we have a girl who can read memories from corpses." Having finished disposing of the corpse, Han Yuzheng went in search of his pet. While opening one of the doors, he accidentally tore out the handle. Raising it to his eye level, Yuzheng looked at it in confusion. After this incident, leaning on the door, Han Yujin thought in embarrassment, "God, I can't control my power. Because of the last retribution, all of my characteristics have grown like yeast." Sighing heavily at the incredible strength he had gained, Han Yujin thought, "This boost will last for a week. It used to run out in an hour. When I return, I'll need to carefully conceal it so I don't get caught." As he thought about how to conceal the incredible power he had gained, Han Yujin suddenly remembered something else, saying in his head, "By the way, of the good skills of the Inkling, I have..." Looking at the skills he had acquired, Han Yujin saw the following: Viscous Poison, Thorn Trap, Wall Lizard, Claws, Intuition of the Weak, and Poison Tentacles. Noticing the Wall Lizard skill, Yujin thought, "The Stealth skill is perfect for hiding, and Intuition of the Weak. With it, I don't have to worry about running into higher-class hunters." Rising to his feet, Han Yujin immediately felt pain in his left leg at the calf and cried out, "Ouch! It hurts!" But immediately afterwards, after revealing his skills, he spoke in alarm, gritting his teeth in pain. "Well, thanks to the skills, the characteristics that have been raised by the ability, the pain is not so severe that I cannot walk." Using his Wall Lizard stealth skill, Han Yujin strode confidently forward to achieve his main goal. After turning invisible, Han Yujin walked toward the main deck of the ship where the rest of the kidnappers were supposed to be and spoke. "Now, it's time. Shall we go find Mir?" As Han Yujin walked forward on the deck, he heard someone's voice. As he walked a little further, he saw the three kidnappers talking to each other, and one of them exclaimed, "Ha ha! And now? Oh, what time is it?" Pulling out his cell phone, one of the kidnappers said worriedly, "We can get out safely, right?" The other replied, "Of course we will. The ship will be here soon." Before one of the kidnappers could finish his sentence, some unknown force grabbed them by the throats and began to pull them in an unknown direction. Along with these hijackers, all the other bandits and accomplices on the deck also came under attack and fell to the ground, moaning from suffocation. Not realizing what was happening, the frightened hunters tried to escape, and one of them exclaimed, There's something around my neck. The other exclaimed, Someone help me. After that, Han Yujin reached the main deck, where the kidnapping mastermind, or the main person who carried out the kidnapping, was most likely located. When he saw the unknown man in front of him, he exclaimed in alarm, Who? Kicking the door open with his foot and slowly stepping inside, Han Yujin heard himself being called out, Who the hell are you? He spoke angrily to the man. The victim of your kidnapping. When Han Yujin was only halfway into the room, he was surprised to hear this. It seems that you are the most important person among all those who are left. Seeing Han Yujin in front of him, the frightened man called out to him in dismay, confused, You? How did you get out? When Han Yujin heard this man say this, he said to him, It is none of your business. Where is the flaming horned lion? The man just smiled with a sly smile, picking up a small bedside table. Continuing to try to get some information out of the man, Han Yujin said, If you put up any resistance? But his sentence was interrupted when he saw a small table fly by. Seeing that the enemy had hit the wall with that throw, leaving a dent in it, Han Yujin heard himself say, You were lucky to get out of there as an F-class. Hearing such words from what he considered to be an impudent F-class, the man added with a disgruntled shake of his head, You should have been thinking about escaping. Why did you barge in here fearlessly? Pulling out his weapon from his inventory, Park Sang-hoon said to Han Yujin, Flaming horned lion? He's securely imprisoned. I even have the key. What are you going to do now? Pulling out his weapon, the Bloodwind axe, Park Sang-hoon added, I advise you to surrender. You're up against the C-class. Being overconfident in his abilities, Park Sang-hoon said to Han Yujin, It's too bad. But before he could say that, he was hit by a punch that hurt him quite badly. After feeling such a powerful blow that knocked him down, Park Sang-hyun was confused, not understanding what had happened. And then he heard Han Yujin say, Give me the key and tell me where it is. Gathering his strength and standing up again, Park Sang-hyun said to Han Yujin, Whoa, what are you doing? But this time, he was not allowed to finish, and was immediately thrown to the ground. Trying to get up again and again, Park Sang-hyun said, Is it about an object? Did you really hide your skills? Wait, damn. Being slapped in the face every time he tried to get up, Park Sang-hyun wiped his battered face with his hand and said, Bastard. How did you even get caught? Standing at the entrance to the room, Han Yujin scratched his backside and said thoughtfully, This has absolutely nothing to do with you. Give it back. As he struck the enemy with this, he heard him groan, Ugh, ugh. And then he spoke to him, hoping that he realized the difference in strength. I don't want to hurt you like this myself. Taking Park Sang-hoon's axe, Han Yujin added, But this is not my only skill, do you understand? If you obey me. With that, Han Yujin used the viscous poison skill on his Bloodwind axe, and it immediately began to melt in his hands. Han Yujin then spoke with a joyful expression. Or, seeing that his powerful weapon had turned into an incomprehensible viscous liquid, Park Sang-hyun was seriously frightened and jumped back. Realizing that Jin was no joke, Park Sang-hyun said in fright, The key! I'll give it back! The cage in the center of the first compartment. Hearing this, Yu-jin extended his hand and said, Great! Give it to me! Hearing Han Yu-jin's words, Park Sang-hyun held out a paper made of magic material and said, Here's the contract. After handing him the contract, Park Sang-hyun added, Guarantee my safety first. I will give you the key, and you must promise me that you will not attack me afterward. Taking the contract in his hands, Han Yu-jin studied it in detail and said, All right, and I'll add a clause that you won't tell anyone about me. Hearing this, Park Sang-hyun was frightened. Yes. After signing the agreement with Han Yu-jin, Park Sang-hyun was freed from his bonds as soon as he gave Han Yu-jin the key. Once he was free to move, he looked down at his hands and groaned. Holding the key he had just received from Park Sang-hyun, Han Yu-jin said, holding the contract in his hand. All right, I'll go get Mir. Turning his back on the enemy, Han Yu-jin added, You take care of it. As he spoke, the enemy was already preparing to attack him when he signed the contract. The very next second after the agreement was signed, Park Sang-hoon used his skill to transform his right hand into a beast's paw. As soon as this happened, Park Sang-hoon pounced on Han Yu-jin and grabbed him by the throat, happy that he could so easily deceive Han Yu-jin. Grabbing the boy's throat with his other hand, Park Sang-hoon strangled Han Yu-jin, and hearing him moan from lack of acid, he gloated, Ha ha, you bought it. Looking at Han Yu-jin with a haughty look, Park Sang-hoon said to him, So what now? You can't attack me anymore, huh? There's a strong curse on this contract. If you attack me, you'll be blinded for breaking the contract. Continuing to mock Han Yu-jin, whom he thought he had fooled, Park Sang-hyun continued, You should be more careful. Although, how can a newcomer who has barely been in a dungeon before know? Being in the clutches of the enemy, Han Yu-jin, without showing any, even the slightest emotion, held the contract in his hands and simply tore it up. Seeing this, Park Sang-hyun exclaimed in surprise. Eh? Seeing what Han Yu-jin had done, Park Sang-ju said in surprise, Eh? What? After that, the contract began to dissolve into purple poison, and Jin received a notification. Blindness curse activated for contract destruction, and then another notification immediately followed. Blindness curse neutralized by curse resistance. L. After that, Han Yu-jin grabbed Park Sang-hoon's hand and said to him, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I am not a beginner. I am the most experienced one here. Han Yu-jin used a viscous poison to dissolve his enemy, who had decided to violate the terms of the contract, and said, Ah, I knew it. Walking away from the poisonous cloud left behind by Park Sang-hoon, Han Yu-jin said in an indifferent voice, although I wasn't going to save his life anyway. As Han Yu-jin watched everything that had fallen into the viscous poison melt like ice cream on fire, he added, No one would ever think I did it, right? It looks more like some kind of internal conflict. Walking past the room with the kidnappers who had taken Han Yu-jin from the abyss, Han Yu-jin looked at them as they lay unconscious and said, Let them stay. They didn't see me use the skill. Continuing on, Han Yu-jin added, I am sure that the abyss will take care of them when they come to rescue me from captivity. As he continued on, he also saw something that he could not pass by, a dead inkling lying in one of the rooms. Going inside to see him, Han Yu-jin thought, if I leave him like this, he will be cut up for materials and sold. Instead, using his skill, Han Yu-jin also decided to hide the body of his murdered comrade, who had given his life to help Han Yu-jin. Turning his body into a crystal, Han Yu-jin took it with him and said his last words before leaving that place. Thank you, Ink. When Han Yu-jin went to the room that Park Sang-hoon had mentioned earlier, he saw a cage with a sleeping pet in front of him and said to it, Dad is here, Mir. Opening the cage and entering it, Han Yu-jin spoke to him in surprise, not seeing any reaction to his actions. Are you still asleep? After entering the cage, Han Yu-jin closed the lock behind him and thought about what to do next. I'd like to get him out of here immediately, but that would only arouse more suspicion. Taking his pet in his arms and lifting him up, Han Yu-jin said to him, Will you wait here with your daddy for everyone else? Seeing how cute he was, Han Yu-jin sat down and put him in his arms, stroking him and saying happily, Ha ha ha, look at him, sleeping with his tongue out. Sitting with his pet in the cage, Han Yu-jin added, It's okay now, before you know it, they'll be coming for us. I'm so glad you're okay. Don't you dare die before me. Meanwhile, the agents of the Abyss, who had already arrived at the seaport and searched the ship that Han Yu-jin was supposed to be on, exclaimed with joy, We've found him, shouting to the entire deck so that everyone could hear them.